High atop a New York skyscraper with a breathtaking view of the city, James Harrington James, CEO of Harrington Enterprises, sat in his boardroom. James's office was a reflection of his life, luxurious, meticulously organized, and devoid of any kind of emotion. He was a powerful businessman, but his heart was closed, immune to any kind of affection. James had rejected all the high society debutantes that his mother or business friends tried to introduce him to. They were beautiful, but superficial. They liked his power and wealth, but they didn't see the man behind the numbers and the endless meetings. To him, they were all the same, self-interest disguised as charm. One day, leaving work earlier than usual, he decided to walk the streets of New York, far from his comfort zone. Along the way, his eyes caught sight of a figure unlike any he was used to seeing. Clara, a woman of simple appearance, was selling flowers on the sidewalk. Her hair, tied in a simple ponytail, and her humble clothes did not make her attractive in the eyes of James's society. But what caught his attention was her genuine smile, something he rarely saw. She didn't seem concerned about what people thought. There she was, amidst the city's chaos, with a gleam of determination in her eyes, selling flowers and trying to secure a better future for her young son, who was beside her. Clara had no idea who he was. She simply greeted him politely when he approached to look at the flowers. James, then, found himself in a dilemma. He, who had always rejected women who approached him because of their status, was suddenly attracted to a simple woman. A woman who hadn't even recognized him as one of the richest men in the country. "Can I take all the flowers?" James asked, with a vague expression, as if he were testing something. Clara looked at him, surprised by the unusual question. "Are you really going to want them all?" Clara asked, somewhat suspiciously. James smiled, a rare smile that spread across his face. "Yes, all of them." As he spoke, Clara noticed that he wasn't wearing a flashy suit like the other men she bumped into on the street. He seemed different, as if he were lost or disconnected from something. "Okay," she said, taking the flowers and handing them to him with a smile. He leaned in a little closer, observing the gleam in her eyes. The sincerity, the transparency, something he had never seen before in his interactions with high society women. He felt something strange, a sense of vulnerability. Perhaps it was seeing someone so real, so far removed from his world of luxury and pretense. "Are you always here?" he asked, feeling a curiosity he never imagined he'd have for someone so far removed from his social circle. "Yes, I'm here almost every day," Clara replied simply, still unaware of who he was. "Life isn't easy, but it's what I have." James was silent for a moment, absorbing the stark reality of her words. He was a man who controlled empires and had the world at his feet, but he never imagined the kind of struggle Clara faced daily just to survive. At that moment, something changed. He decided he needed to get to know her better, not for her looks, not for her status, but for the way she lived her life with so much purpose, without needing recognition. "Would you like some coffee? Would you like to chat for a bit?" he asked, trying to understand what was attracting him so much. Clara hesitated for a moment. She wasn't used to receiving this kind of invitation, but for some reason she decided to accept. They walked together to a small cafe on the corner, away from the spotlight and ostentation. After James's invitation, Clara led him to the small cafe, which had the welcoming smell of fresh coffee and warm bread. They sat at a discreet table in the back, away from the hustle and bustle of the street. The place was simple, but full of life. Clara took off her coat and looked at James, who seemed like a fish out of water there. He was used to more sophisticated places, but he was genuinely interested in learning more about her. Clara looked at him curiously. She was used to dealing with the daily difficulties of raising a child alone and working to survive, but she had never imagined that someone like James, with his air of mystery and status, would sit down in a simple cafe to talk to her. "So, you said you work a lot, but what exactly do you do?" Clara asked, breaking the silence as she stirred her coffee. James smiled, admiring the simplicity of the question. She wasn't impressed with him, which was somehow more refreshing than he'd expected. "I'm the CEO of a tech company. Basically, I make decisions that can change the economy, for better or for worse." He laughed humorlessly, a laugh devoid of any happiness. Clara looked at him intently. "It must be difficult to live with so much responsibility. And you, do you feel fulfilled?" James paused for a moment, surprised by the sincerity of the question. He wasn't used to being questioned so directly, without any interest in his position or his money. "I don't know," he replied thoughtfully. "Sometimes I feel more distant from people than close to them." Clara, not knowing what else to ask, changed the subject. "I'm a single mother of a boy named Lucas. He's 5 years old. I work every day to ensure he has a better future than mine. I never had much, you know, but I always did what I could so that he would have the best I could offer." James watched her intently. She was being sincere, without masks, without trying to impress him. He found her fascinating, but what impressed him most was her honesty. Clara had grown up in a humble neighborhood, and from a young age she had known what struggle was. She had lost her husband in a tragic accident 3 years ago, and since then she had lived with the pain of loss and the responsibility of raising her son alone. She had no time for lamenting, as she always needed to be strong. Her mornings were filled with the market, Lucas's classes, and her small jobs selling flowers and other simple items on the streets. She didn't have grand dreams, just the hope of giving Lucas a better life. "I just want him to have opportunities that I didn't have," said Clara, her voice thick with emotion. James, on the other hand, lived in a world that seemed distant and unreal to Clara. He had money, power, and what many would call success, but he didn't have what she had, a real reason to fight, a genuine purpose in life. As they talked, James found himself reflecting on his own life. He had always thought that his career and financial success were the key to everything, but at that moment he began to question whether he was truly happy. He was searching for something he didn't know what it was, but now he felt it could be something that money couldn't buy, even though he didn't know it yet. Clara was offering him something that money could never buy, the prospect of a life with purpose, with deeper values, and a worldview he had never considered. The moment was interrupted by a call on Clara's cell phone. She looked at the screen and sighed before answering. "Hi, Lucas. I'm on my way home now, my love." She smiled, but the smile quickly faded. "Yes, I'm coming, don't worry." James watched the scene, realizing the responsibility Clara carried. She had no time to waste. She couldn't afford to linger in cafes or get lost in conversations for too long. She had to get back to work. She was a mother, a working woman, and in her eyes he saw a strength he had never possessed. "I'll walk you there," said James, suddenly feeling an urge to do something to help, although he didn't know exactly what. Clara hesitated. "No need, I can manage on my own." She looked at him with a gentle smile, but he noticed that behind the politeness lay something deeper. "I insist," he replied, with a confidence he didn't know he possessed. After their conversation at the cafe, James decided to walk Clara home. During the drive, the streets of New York seemed even more bustling than he had imagined. The contrast between the luxury he lived in and the harsh reality Clara faced was immense. Each corner seemed further from his world, as if he were entering a parallel universe where things truly mattered. Clara, on the other hand, didn't know how to react to all of this. The man she had just met was beginning to show himself to be more interesting and attentive than she had imagined, but she was still distant. It was difficult to believe that someone like James, a powerful CEO, could have anything in common with her, a single mother struggling every day to give her son a better future. They walked in silence until Clara decided to break it. "James, you have your life, your career. I'm just an ordinary woman trying to do the best for my son. I don't understand what you're doing here with me." James looked at her, pausing for a moment. I'm trying to understand who I am outside of my work. You're different. You see life in a way I've never seen it before, and that makes me question a lot of things. Clara smiled, but her expression quickly turned serious. Don't try that, James. I'm not your personal therapist. I'm just a woman trying to survive. I don't have time to teach anyone about life. James was silent for a moment, but Clara's words struck him deeply. He had always believed that money was the key to everything. But now, with her, he felt a kind of emptiness. He was being confronted with something that couldn't be bought. The harshness of real life, the daily struggle for survival, and Clara's raw honesty. Upon arriving at Clara's small house, she turned to him. Here we are. You don't need to come to the door. She seemed a little uncomfortable with his presence in her life. James sensed the resistance in her voice and knew she was trying to protect herself. He also felt that Clara's world wasn't as simple as she let it seem. Clara, I just wanted you to know that I'm not here out of obligation or because you're different. I'm here because you made me see life in a different way. It made me realize that maybe I've lost what really matters. Clara looked at him, and for a moment her expression softened. She knew he was being genuine, but she also knew he didn't understand the complexities of her life. James, you have a whole life full of responsibilities, a world of privilege. I'm just a woman trying to keep things in place for my son. I can't get lost in impossible dreams. She went inside the house quickly, closing the door without waiting for a response from James. James stood on the sidewalk for a moment, staring at the closed door. He was used to being the man who controlled everything around him, but now he felt completely lost. Clara, with her simple life, her strength and determination, challenged him in a way he didn't know how to handle. As he drove back to his own home, he reflected on Clara's words. He was trapped in a life of luxury, but felt something was missing. Clara had touched a part of him he didn't know existed. She represented everything he had left behind in his relentless pursuit of success, authenticity, genuine connection, and simplicity, but he knew that the difference between him and Clara was vast. She was in a world where survival was a daily matter, and he in a world where nothing seemed truly challenging, except perhaps his own choices. The following day was even more difficult for James. At work, the pressures mounted. His partners were demanding more results. His team was demanding more from his leadership, and he felt that, despite everything, his life was on a path of no return. When he entered his meeting room, the image of Clara, her simplicity, her daily struggles seeped into his mind, like a constant reminder that something was wrong. But what exactly was wrong? He didn't know. Up until that moment, he had always known how to manage his life as a businessman. But now, thinking about Clara, he found himself questioning everything. He wanted more, but he didn't know how to ask for it or find it. He wanted to change, but his life was built around an identity he no longer recognized. Meanwhile, Clara was resolving her own internal conflicts. She couldn't deny that there was something special about James, but at the same time, she knew that if she got involved with him, she would risk everything she had built up until now. She didn't want to be just another love story that would end with time. And more importantly, she didn't want to lose her independence and her focus on what really mattered: Lucas. After the awkwardness of their last encounter, James tried to return to his routine. However, he couldn't get Clara out of his head. She had become a kind of mystery he felt the need to solve. He decided he would see her again. Under the pretext of delivering the flowers he had bought from Clara, he went to the same place where he had first met her. But to his surprise, she wasn't there. Frustrated, James walked through the neighborhood streets, asking local shopkeepers if they had seen Clara. After a few minutes, an elderly woman, the owner of a small antique shop, recognized him and pointed to a side street. She passes by here every day, but today it seems she's busy. He followed the indicated direction and then found her. Clara was in front of a small school, talking to a social worker with Lucas beside her. James hesitated for a moment, but decided to approach. "Clara," he said, trying not to sound as anxious as he felt, I brought the flowers. I was thinking of you and wanted to see how you were." Clara looked at him, visibly uncomfortable. But before she could refuse or respond, the social worker turned to James. "You're, the CEO of Harrington Enterprises, right?" James nodded, uncomfortable with the recognition. The social worker then explained that Clara was seeking financial assistance to secure Lucas's educational future. She didn't want to depend on anyone, but circumstances were forcing her to look for alternatives. James felt both overwhelmed and touched by the situation. He knew he could help, that his money could make things much easier, but for some reason he hesitated. Clara didn't want anything from him, but he felt the pressure of being able to change her life with a simple gesture. Meanwhile, Clara began to realize that her life was about to take an unpredictable turn. James's presence grew stronger, but with each interaction she felt more insecure. She was afraid that if she got involved with him, her life would change in a way she wasn't ready to handle. She knew James was different. He had power, money, and a life that seemed complete. But he also seemed lost, and Clara found herself questioning the reason for her own resistance. She feared he was just another person interested in her for the wrong reason. Charity, perhaps, or a desire to prove he could change her life. However, the truth was that Clara also felt something for James. The way he made her feel important, as if she had something to offer beyond her daily struggle, made her question her own limits. But she was determined not to lose herself in this game. Her priority was Lucas, not a man who represented a world so distant from her own. James, despite being torn between his desire to help Clara and his fear of becoming emotionally involved, decided to take the boldest step. He knew Clara needed support, so, without warning, he went to the school where Lucas studied and made a significant donation to ensure her education without her knowing where it came from. When Clara found out, she was furious. She felt insulted, as if James were trying to manipulate her or buy her affection. "You have no right to do this. I don't need your charity, James. I am not charity." The confrontation was tense, and Clara, feeling betrayed, distanced herself even further from him. James tried to explain himself, but Clara wouldn't listen. She wasn't interested in him buying her life with money, no matter how generous he was. She was proud of her independence, and by doing something so grand for her, James unknowingly touched her most vulnerable spot. After the fight, Clara locked herself in her house for days, trying to process what had happened. She was emotionally exhausted and didn't want to deal with the pressure James put on her life anymore. Even though he had good intentions, she didn't want to be just another person in his life for him to save. James, on the other hand, was shaken by Clara's reaction. He felt his attempt to help her had been misinterpreted, but he didn't know how to resolve the situation. He wanted to show her that it wasn't just his money that motivated him, but what he felt for her, something that was beginning to grow inside him. While Clara grappled with her own demons and her decision to distance herself, James found himself at a point of reflection. He no longer saw life the same way he once did. His pursuit of success and power seemed empty. Clara, on the other hand, had brought to the surface feelings he never knew existed. They were in different worlds, with distinct challenges, but their stories began to intertwine in a way that neither of them could have predicted. After the intense confrontation, the following days were silent. Clara and James didn't speak. She withdrew even further into her own world, trying to protect herself and Lucas. Every time she thought of James, she felt a mixture of anger and confusion. He had shown a side of himself that she didn't know how to handle. His attempt to help her was, in her view, further proof that he didn't understand what it meant to fight for something without expecting anything in return. James, on the other hand, became obsessed with the idea of Clara, without understanding exactly why she had rejected him. He had tried to help, but felt that his intentions had not been understood. He knew he was falling in love, but felt that she was too distant, and he didn't know how to reach her heart. It was then, at the office, that James received an unexpected call. It was from Lucas's school. Clara was in financial trouble. Lucas's school fees had been increased, and she couldn't afford them. The payment deadline was fast approaching. James knew that Clara would never ask for help directly, but he felt this was the moment to do something that wouldn't be interpreted as charity, but as a genuine act of support. With a heavy heart, James made a drastic decision. He arranged an anonymous donation, but with one condition. Clara would only find out who the donor was when the payment was completed, and she couldn't refuse or reject it. James knew it was the only way to help her without humiliating her. He hoped that by doing this, she would see that his intentions were not of control, but of genuine love and affection. When Clara received the news that the school payment had been made, she was in shock. First, she refused to believe that someone would have done something for her without her knowledge, without expecting something in return. Then, the final blow, she discovered that the help had come from James. It was at that moment that the wall Clara had built began to crumble. She felt something she couldn't quite identify. Part of her anger and pride was replaced by gratitude, and at the same time by a growing sense of vulnerability. She didn't want to be weak. She didn't want to depend on anyone. But there she was, being helped by a man who, until then, seemed so distant from her reality. The following morning, Clara decided she needed to confront James. She found him in his office, unannounced, with a closed expression. James was in the middle of a meeting when he was interrupted by his secretary. "Clara," she said hesitantly, "Mrs. Clara is here to see you." When James saw her, his expression was one of surprise, but also of relief. He knew the moment of truth had arrived. "Clara, I never meant to hurt you, and if you hate me for it, I'll understand. I just wanted to help," he said, trying to remain calm. Clara stared at him, her eyes more intense than ever. "I don't hate you, James. I didn't know what to do about it. I've always had to fend for myself, and you were forcing me to depend on you. I'm not a charity case. I don't want you to see me like this." James, sensing the pain in Clara's words, stepped forward. "I don't see you that way, Clara. I never wanted you to feel like a charity. I see you as a strong woman who doesn't need me to survive. But at the same time, I see someone I care deeply about." Clara took a deep breath, trying to process everything he was saying. "I'm not ready for this, James. I'm not ready to be vulnerable with you. I'm scared." James took a step back, but now he understood better what Clara was going through. He knew that words wouldn't be enough to convince her, but he wasn't willing to give up on her so easily. "I'm not asking you to be vulnerable, Clara. I'm just asking you to let me be by your side. Not because you need me, but because perhaps we can both meet in a place where we can be real together." Clara remained silent, the weight of her own emotions overwhelming her. She wanted to believe him, but fear paralyzed her. She had spent her entire life protecting herself and her son from any illusion. She knew that if she surrendered to this new reality with James, she would lose something fundamental, her independence. But on the other hand, she felt such a deep connection with him that it was difficult to ignore. "I don't know if I can, James," she said finally, her voice faltering. "I don't know if I'm capable of believing in us." James didn't have time to reply, as his partner's last-minute meeting demanded his immediate attention. He looked at Clara one last time before returning to his business routine, now with a clear mission: to make Clara believe, even if only for a moment, that love isn't based on money or power, but on something much deeper. Clara left James's office with mixed feelings. The conversation with him, while revealing, had opened more doors than she was prepared to handle. She hadn't expected him to be so direct, so sincere, and more importantly, she hadn't expected him to have the courage to help, even knowing she would reject it. But now, the weight of the consequences of that help was pressing on her in a way she couldn't ignore. She no longer knew how to deal with her own feelings. On one hand, she felt grateful to James for helping Lucas, but on the other, there was the fear of getting lost in something she couldn't control. She had always been strong and independent, but now she felt a vulnerability she had never experienced before. Her internal struggle was enormous. She wanted to be strong, but she also wanted to be able to trust. In the following days, Clara distanced herself from James. She needed time for herself, time to understand what was happening inside her. She didn't want him to be the reason for her happiness or suffering. He couldn't be a solution to her problems, and she knew it. What scared her most was the idea that by opening up to him, she could lose her identity, her freedom, her control over her life. James, for his part, was in an even more complicated situation. He didn't know how to approach Clara without invading her space, but at the same time he couldn't stay away from her. He wanted her to know how much he cared, but he knew he couldn't force it. He was beginning to realize that unlike his other business achievements, winning Clara over wasn't something that could be done hastily or by force. He would need to be patient and wait until she was ready to take the next step. While trying to process everything that had happened with James, Clara also faced a new wave of challenges. The financial pressure to maintain a stable life was increasing. The bills were rising, and the income from selling flowers on the streets wasn't enough to cover all her expenses. She found herself in a moment of despair. Should she ask James, who was now distant, for help, or should she continue trying to manage on her own? Pride and the need for independence prevented her from seeking any kind of assistance. Clara spent sleepless nights trying to find a solution. She knew James's help was an option, but the weight of accepting something from him, especially after what had happened, was something she didn't know how to handle. She felt like a failure, unable to keep her own life in order. Deep down, she knew she was drifting away from James, but at the same time, she didn't know how to go on without him. James, in his relentless pursuit of a way to prove to Clara that he wasn't like all the other men in her life, decided he needed to take action. He sought to learn more about Clara's financial situation and discovered she was in dire straits. He had heard about Lucas's problems with his school fees, but he hadn't imagined how serious the situation truly was. Without Clara's knowledge, James decided to invest in a plan to help her without her feeling the humiliation of receiving direct assistance. He contacted the social worker at Lucas's school and arranged for a scholarship to cover the remaining expenses, all anonymously. The plan was underway when James decided that perhaps the best way for Clara to understand his involvement wasn't just financially, but emotionally. He needed to show her that he was there for who she was, not for selfish reasons. James then began to distance himself somewhat from his work routine and little by little make more discreet visits without invading her personal space. When Clara learned about Lucas's scholarship, she was initially furious. Once again, James had done something for her without asking. But upon closer examination of the scholarship's terms, she began to realize that he wasn't trying to manipulate or control the situation. He had found a way to help her without infringing on her pride. But at the same time, this gesture made her feel more vulnerable than ever. She didn't know what to do with it. Instead of pushing him away, she felt herself being pulled back to him, an invisible thread connecting her to James. She knew she couldn't keep distancing herself from him without confronting what she truly felt. That afternoon, Clara went to James's office, determined to have a definitive conversation with him. She didn't want to postpone it any longer. She needed to understand what he truly wanted, and more importantly, what she wanted. When she entered the meeting room, she found James alone, looking at papers. He stood up as soon as he saw her, and without a word, she approached him. "I don't understand you, James. Why do you do this? Why are you trying to help me all the time?" James looked at her deeply without hesitation. "Because I care about you, Clara. I want you to know that I'm not just here to help you financially, but to support you as a person, as a woman. I never wanted to pressure you, but when you allow me, I want to be by your side." Clara took a deep breath, the weight of her words falling on her. "I can't depend on you, James. I can't lose who I am." He stepped forward, his eyes locked on hers. "You're not losing anything, Clara. You're just learning to share your burden with someone who cares." Clara looked at him, the internal struggle in her heart, and finally, with a gentle smile, said, "Perhaps you're right." The relationship between James and Clara had matured in an unexpected way. Over the weeks following their final confrontation, Clara began to realize how much James had changed in his outlook on life. He was no longer the arrogant and distant man she had known at the beginning. He had shown himself to be vulnerable, willing to open his heart in a way she had never imagined, and despite her resistance, something inside Clara began to give way. James, for his part, was also changing. He felt that the success and power he had always craved no longer brought him satisfaction. He no longer felt complete without the connection he shared with Clara, and his journey was no longer just about professional achievements, but about becoming a better person, for her and for himself. He knew that true greatness lay not in controlling everything around him, but in surrendering to something deeper: love, authenticity, and true partnership. Clara was finally beginning to understand that her independence didn't have to be a barrier to happiness. On the contrary, she realized that allowing herself to be loved without losing her essence could be the key to her true personal growth. She still feared the idea of depending on someone, but now she was seeing James's love differently, not as a threat, but as an opportunity for mutual growth. She began to reflect on her own strengths and weaknesses. Her life had always been full of challenges, but she had become so self-sufficient that she had forgotten the value of vulnerability and trust. James had shown her that she no longer needed to carry all the weight alone, that she could share it with someone without losing her identity. James knew Clara was at a turning point. He didn't want to pressure her, but he knew that at some point he would have to show her that life with him could be a choice, not an obligation. So on a cold winter night, James invited her to a simple dinner, far from any expectations, far from the glitz and glamour of the corporate world he used to dominate. Clara arrived at the restaurant, a small and discreet place, something not typical of James's lifestyle. They sat at an intimate table with soft lighting, and he looked at her with sincerity in his eyes. "Clara, I'm not asking you to change your life for me, but I want you to know that I'm here for you. I want it to be your choice. If you want to walk beside me, I want you to do it because you believe in what we can build together, not because of pressure or something I've done for you." Clara, touched by his words, looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. "I'm still afraid, James. I'm afraid that by opening up, I might lose who I am." James smiled gently. "I'm not going to ask you to change, Clara. I just want you to allow me to walk beside you, to allow me to help when you need it, but without ever wanting to control you. You have your worth, your strength, and none of that will change." Those words resonated deeply within Clara. It was confirmation of what she was beginning to understand. She didn't have to choose between being strong and being loved. She could be both. She didn't have to carry the weight of the world alone, nor did she have to deprive herself of having someone by her side who understood her, who respected her completely. At that moment, Clara made a decision. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was a decision to allow herself to be happy, to allow herself to accept love without losing her identity. She smiled at James, finally feeling the sensation that she was ready to move on. "James, you're right. I want to try. I want to walk this path with you so that we can both grow together. I don't have all the answers, but I know that by your side, I can find myself in a way I never imagined." The following months marked a new phase for both of them. James not only helped Clara financially, but also dedicated himself to supporting her in ways that went beyond money. He learned to listen more, to respect more, and to give Clara space to be the woman she was without trying to mold her. Clara, in turn, discovered that vulnerability was not synonymous with weakness, but with courage. She allowed herself to be loved, and in doing so realized that her independence was not something she needed to rigidly maintain. She could be strong and at the same time open to love. By the end of that year, James and Clara were closer than ever. Their relationship had become solid, but without losing the authenticity they both sought. They weren't perfect, but they had learned to walk side by side, respecting each other's flaws and strengths. One late afternoon, as they walked together down the street, James stopped and looked at Clara. "I never thought life would lead me this far, but today I see that what I've always sought was right in front of me." Clara smiled, holding his hand. "I didn't think something like this was possible either, but maybe it is." The story of James and Clara wasn't about saving each other. It wasn't about a grand transformation from one life to another. It was about two individuals with their flaws and strengths who met at the right moment when they were ready to grow together, not as a salvation project, but as mutual support. They had learned that instead of depending only on themselves, they could trust and lean on each other without losing their essence. For them, true love wasn't about control, but about the freedom to be who they truly were, alongside someone who understood them. Time passed quickly. Clara and James, who had previously seemed to live in completely different worlds, now shared a reality built on trust, respect, and above all, genuine love. Their relationship was no longer about who would give more or who would control the situation. They had both learned to support each other equally, respecting each other's boundaries. Clara, with James's help, managed to establish her own flower shop, something that had always been a distant dream, but which now seemed real. James, in turn, finally found a peace he didn't know existed. His corporate world, so frenetic and hectic, now seemed less important than the quiet life he shared with Clara. They had overcome challenges, both personal and relational, but most importantly, they had found something deeper, the ability to understand and love each other in a way that didn't depend on material interests, but on a genuine and human connection. Clara's flower shop became a success. She began hiring people from the community and teaching young mothers how to work with flowers, creating a space of empowerment and independence. James's support, though always discreet, was constant. He wasn't just there to finance, but to give advice and help expand Clara's vision. However, she always made sure the business was something of her own, something she had built with her own hands, even with his support. In turn, James realized that his true calling lay not only in the business world, but in helping people find themselves amidst their difficulties, to connect with what truly mattered. He became more involved in charitable projects focused on single mothers and vulnerable children, inspired by Clara's own journey. James and Clara had transformed. They had both grown, but not in the way they had initially imagined. It wasn't a matter of wealth or power. It was about finding each other at the right time and learning to respect what each brought to the relationship. They had molded themselves, but in a way that complemented each other without losing their individual essence. They learned that love doesn't require grand gestures, but small, consistent actions every day. Mutual support, understanding each other's weaknesses and strengths, and patience were the foundation of what they now considered their true happiness. On a sunny morning after a long day at work, James and Clara walked hand in hand in the park. They were at peace, in tune with what they had achieved and with what was yet to come. Clara looked at James and smiled. "I never imagined life could be like this, James. I really thought my independence was all I needed. But you showed me that there's something even stronger, something that grows without needing so much effort." James smiled and hugged her. "I knew that one day you would understand. I just wanted to be by your side, without pressuring you, without forcing you. And now I know that we've found something real, something we both need." Indeed, as they walked toward the future together, the sound of dry leaves being crushed underfoot symbolized the beginning of a new phase, a phase in which they were no longer two distant worlds, but a shared path. Several years had passed since that pivotal summer, and Clara and James now had lives filled with achievements and happiness. Clara's flower shop had expanded to other cities, and she had become a symbol of female empowerment. James, with her constant support, had also found his balance, now dedicating himself to social projects that helped mothers and children overcome adversity, just as he had seen in Clara. Together they discovered that true wealth lay in shared love and the lives they transformed, showing the world that sometimes the greatest victories come from the heart. Clara and James's story is a reminder that true love isn't based on wealth or power, but on trust, patience, and mutual respect. If you also believe that love is the key to overcoming any obstacle, share this story with your friends and tell us how Clara and James's journey inspired you. Leave a comment about what you think is necessary to create a healthy and lasting relationship. Let's continue this conversation. Together we can learn and grow with each step of our own journey. Clara and James's journey teaches us that true love goes beyond material possessions. It's based on trust, respect, and mutual support, allowing both to grow and become stronger. And have you ever experienced a story of personal transformation and true love? Share your experience in the comments. If this story touched you, be sure to share it with your friends and family. Let's spread the message together that when we allow ourselves to grow and trust, we can achieve what seemed impossible. What will be the next step in your journey?